John, welcome to my Diversity and Inclusion Q&A initiative. I have to say, I'm so excited to welcome you on board this episode and to hear your story. I know you believe in building autonomous and motivated teams. You always work to inspire those around you to reach their potential. And of course, you're passionate about diversity and inclusion. So welcome, John.
Hi, super glad to be here. I think this initiative that you're doing is really inspiring for myself as well. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. So thank you for inviting me.
It would be great if we could please find out a little bit about yourself and also why diversity and inclusion is important to you.
My name's John, and I'm Chief Architect at Paradox Interactive. And we build video games primarily based in Stockholm, but we have studios around the world. And I've been working there for 6 or 7 years, started off as a programmer and then moved up through management into my current role. So I've had a lot of opportunities to see different teams across the company work and grow. Before that, I was actually running my own company. It was very small, but we did lots of consultancy work. So I got to see loads of different businesses and how they worked. And that was obviously really interesting because I got to witness some teams that worked really well and some that didn't. And while I might not have been in a position to really change those teams, I could at least witness from the sideline and learn some lessons that I've managed to bring into my current role. As for why I'm interested in diversity, I think there's 2 reasons really. And one of them speaks to my head and one of them speaks to my heart, which I think is a really good position to be in. So I first got properly involved, I would say. I've always kind of known it was a good idea, but properly involved about 5 or 6 years ago. And there's a group in Sweden called Tjejer Kodar. And it started off with 100 women who went to Barcelona after summer to learn to code. And there's a really interesting origin story there, but essentially kind of a couple of people wanted to learn to code. They found out that there's lots of other people who were in a similar position, and they just decided to go to Barcelona and learn. And I think it started with 20 of them. They hired a teacher, and then it grew and grew from there. And it's now what is called the Technigo initiative in Stockholm as well. But I was asked to teach a couple of courses there. So it started off one year with just a 3-hour introduction. And the next year we did a full week-long course in teaching game development. And that was super interesting. And we were teaching women how to code with JavaScript, and we built some games and everyone had a lot of fun. It was very hot because it was Barcelona, but that was super nice back when we could go out and travel.
Those were the days.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait for those to come back again. But yeah, so seeing firsthand the different environment that I was teaching people in, because I've taught people in various groups before, but I saw so many differences in that group, and it spoke to me in the way that you hear a lot of stories when you're teaching about how it can be hard for certain groups to speak up in these environments. And I just saw a completely different environment here where everyone was kind of more open about their failures. No one was trying to one-up each other. And I could see at that point there was a need to have different approaches when teaching different groups of people. And I kind of got hooked on that. So I tried to run shorter courses and help out where I could. But then I saw my wife also go through the similar journey. So she learned to code 3 or 4 years ago. And along the way, I've seen her, she started out going to some courses and then started to do more formal training. And it's been really interesting seeing, I guess, secondhand, as close as I can, being a man, unfortunately, some of the struggles that she's had along the way. And it just drove home these barriers that maybe before, more than 5 years ago, I'm like kind of aware of them being there. I didn't not believe them, but you think, I don't think they're as bad as you hear, because voices get amplified on Twitter and things, but actually they are. Some of them are, at least. So it was super interesting to see it that close.
Definitely.
Now be in a position to change it.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, John, the fact that you've been involved, you've seen it firsthand with the teaching, of course, and then experiencing it with your wife as well. Do you think that you had a bit of an inspiration on your wife wanting to make that transition to tech?
I hope so. She says so, but I'm not sure if it's just to be nice or if it's true. But she comes from a research background like myself, so we both actually have PhDs. And when we moved to Sweden, we basically moved here so I could work with video games, the childhood dream. And And she actually got into recruitment at that point, deciding to take a pivot in her own career for the first time. And she was recruiting programmers. So she saw a lot of the people that she was recruiting. And I think that was also part of the kind of, hang on, I want to do that. And I was obviously saying how much fun I was having at Paradox coding and having interesting challenges every day. And tech is a really interesting space. Like it's all about having different challenges, and solving crosswords, but for a job is usually how I used to sell it.
Really fantastic that you're a good support system for your wife. And of course, you've worked in many different organizations through the consulting and now at Paradox. What do you genuinely feel are the benefits of having diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Like I say, when I tried to sell diversity and inclusion, I tried to use a balance of the real life benefits that I genuinely don't think people see, and obviously also the stories of my wife. And I think I'm really fortunate to have both of those angles to play with, because I think you need to both tug on the heartstrings as well as making factual comments to make them true. But I think in terms of more kind of concrete benefits that it brings to an organization, obviously the first one is just simply a broader hiring pool. I mean, if you have a very kind of bro culture and your group of ninjas who only wants to hire people like themselves, and you're immediately limiting the people you can bring on board, not just in terms of technical skill sets, but the opinions that they have and the voices that you have in the room. And then I think that also then kind of leads to, when you have a more diverse set of people in your teams and workspaces, you have, first of all, an increased awareness of the fact that other opinions exist. I mean, that sounds silly, but just you start thinking, hang on, what's this person in the team? How are they going to interact with this feature, whether it's part of a game or part of an app or a website? And then you start to also think about more different types of customers. And I think that's where the real value comes from a business perspective, because you're no longer making products just to fit your small niche group of people, but you're building products that can be accessible by a much wider range of users. And I think also, just a slight tangent, but one final benefit which I see is also, you definitely get increased kind of emotional awareness in the workplace as well, which I think is really, really valuable. And I'm not identifying a specific group here. I just think by having different groups in your organization, you're able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And again, that both helps in being creative in building your product, but also when you're going to meetings or thinking about how your career progression ladder might look, you don't immediately default to everyone is like myself, because you picture and interact with those different people, and you start to think, how would they feel? Like when it's your colleague, it's easier to sort of think, well, how would that person at work actually read this statement, as opposed to just theoretical people who aren't me.
There's some amazing benefits, and you're so right, John. The list really is endless, and diversity does come in, of course, many different layers and forms. I myself, I've been in an environment where there was a lack of one specific diversity, being gender. I've been in environments where there's been diversity in every aspect, and I've certainly myself seen the differences in terms of just the innovation, the creativity, being able to learn from other people and their ways of thinking and ways of working. For you, if you've ever been in an environment that is really lacking diversity and inclusion, what were some of the negative effects that you experienced?
In my past, I've not necessarily intentionally, although I would nowadays, obviously try to avoid those environments. So if you see those signs of a closed culture where it's going to be hard to have different opinions heard, then I immediately kind of, my interest level wanes, and I tend to try to find my way out, especially if I was in a consultancy role. But I think, when it comes to tangible examples of where I've seen companies struggle without diversity, I think the most obvious example I can think of is where you've built a bro culture. And this is a fairly typical example, I think, in tech especially. A company starts with 3, 4, 5 people, and they're all your stereo. I mean, I feel hypocritical saying this. Your stereotypical middle-aged white man. Hello, but the entire company is formed from those people, and then they grow to a team of 10 or 15, and that's when, if they haven't made that leap at that point to become more inclusive, and if I was starting a company tomorrow, I'd obviously want to try and start right from day one. The first 3, I think you should have some diversity in it, but not everyone is in that position to make that choice. But if you've grown to 10 or 15 people in your company and you're still just a homogenous group of identical thinking white men, hopefully not with the bro culture, but you might have one of those too, then I think it's really hard to actually change that in the future. You're stuck in your little echo chamber. It becomes tough to hire into because nobody wants to be the token woman in a group of 15 men, because that's not going to be an environment where you can shine or have your opinion heard. Especially because you see a lot of these companies say, we're trying to be more diverse and inclusive. And what they really mean is, I want a woman who thinks exactly like us. And that's not solving the problem. And I think in that environment, it's really hard to hire at some point eventually. And I haven't seen that get to this extreme, but I think your product's going to go stale because you're only thinking about one type of user, and your team's going to get stuck in this little bubble of thinking it's doing everything great and there's only one way of working, when some other big company is doing your product but better over here on the side, growing much faster than you, thinking about different types of users. And your days are probably numbered if you're going down that route. So.
It's really interesting, some of the points you mentioned there, John, particularly around one of nobody wants to be that token woman, for example. So organizations saying that they value diversity and inclusion and they're advocates of it, when if you actually get a microscope and look into the business, there's no diversity, there's not really an inclusive culture. So it has to be for the right reasons, and it has to be genuine. And similar to yourself, John, coming from within, actually working on that and wanting it for the right reasons and not forcing diversity. Have you seen any negative effects of that happen? Have you been in an environment where there's been that forced sense of diversity?
I haven't been on that side of it, but I've definitely seen my wife apply to companies, and we had a very strong signal that is what is being in play here. I think there was, I hope this isn't enough information to call the company out, but there was a company who was hiring for a team of ninjas, or was it wizards, one or the other. And immediately, if you see that keyword in a job advert, you're like, this is already echo chamber culture. But my wife still went to some of the interviews and engaged with them anyway. If it's a small company, maybe someone's just copied an advert from somewhere. So benefit of the doubt, let's give it a go. But it became increasingly clear through the interview process, this company just wanted a woman to solve the diversity issue. And that was obviously not somewhere that was interesting for my wife to work, and all these warning signs bubble up to the top, and you just think I think maybe there is a case where that kind of company, if they're open-minded and willing to listen, can actually change. But I think if you bring up the fact that they call everyone ninjas in the interview process and that makes you uncomfortable, and then they start defending that fact, they're already showing that it's not a place that's willing to change. So
yeah, you're so right, actually. That's such a big one. I see a lot of job specs that have ninjas, rock stars, and although companies seem to think that they sound really cool and quirky, I have this conversation a lot. It's actually doing a bit more harm than good, because automatically, I mean, I myself, I wouldn't affiliate myself with a wizard or a ninja. I mean, I'm Harry Potter and I'm a Harry Potter but I'm not a wizard, right? And that's a really important one you mentioned. And I think that also it's the case of, if, for example, your wife did join that business, how long would she want to stay in that company? Because how long can they retain that diversity if it's all for the wrong reasons as well?
And I think it's a similar topic, but one that I have seen more tangible is that you can have the best intentions, but when you're a growing company and you only have a small number of women, I see this tendency to kind of roll them out at every opportunity. And I think that can be very tiring for those people. It's like, well, we have 10% maybe women programmers and we want 20. So these 3 people get taken to every event, every recruitment event, they're in every interview. And some of them, I think it's good to invite them in if this is a problem they want to solve. But I think men have a tendency to assume that the women are going to solve these problems. Yeah. So we roll them into everything. And that eventually pushes these people away because it's like, well, I got into this industry to code.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
That's so true. And actually, I think what could be equally as valuable is having people like you, John, go and talk at events and advocate, you know, that you're an ally, that you're making a change. You want to diversify teams as well, because for women, that's equally as exciting. Yes, it's great to see other women in the business, but not every organization can do that. But if they can see other people in the business advocating and speaking about the things that they're doing, the actionable things they're doing, I think that could be really valuable as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, and that's really nice to hear, first of all, because we had this discussion obviously a while ago, but when I get invited to partake in events like this, I get a little bit worried that I'm consuming space that I shouldn't be consuming. And I think there's always a balance. I don't want to take up too much space, but I also want to help, right? I want to try and make a point and speak out to people who maybe need to hear a different opinion, people like myself who are maybe sitting on the fence 5 years ago saying, I wish I could do something, but it's not really my place to do something. But if we're not all working at this together, the cultures aren't going to change. I think I'm in a particularly good position, for instance, to change the culture and the opinions of other men who maybe don't feel the same way. And I can perhaps speak to them in a different way that might reach out. So I guess all together we can barrage and make a difference.
It's equally as important for you to have your say. And, you know, the work that you've been doing is just fantastic to see. And thank you for everything you're doing, John, and continue to do. It's really great.
Yeah, I always say that I do it for selfish reasons. I just want my workplaces to be nicer places. I want to learn from people. So.
It's good in that circumstance because it's making a change. And with that in mind and the passion that you have and the things you're doing, as a manager, how have you amplified the voices of diverse minorities, women in your organizations?
This is obviously a tough one because I don't think there's no single big action that you can take which will fix this. I'm very solution oriented at work. I'm usually the one like, great. I understand there's a problem. Let's define it properly and then solve it. So I jump very quickly to solutions. But I think there are some small things you can do here, and I think it's those small things when they add up which can help to make the workplace a place where everyone can speak up. But one thing that I do try to do, which is something I picked up a year or two ago from another workshop that I was part of, is that when we're having a brainstorming meeting or a workshop session and we want everyone to share their opinions, I now try to block off the first 5 or 10 minutes of that meeting so that everyone can have some self-reflection time. This should be kind of quiet time where you can actually think. If you've come in from a busy day, try to just focus on the topic that we're discussing today. And then make sure that we go around the room and everyone gets an opportunity to say their piece without being interrupted by anyone else. Because I think one of the biggest problems that I often see is in these problem-solving environments or even creative environments, everyone wants to have their say and people start talking over each other. And that's when the echo chamber starts to build a little bit, but also maybe the people who express themselves differently, they struggle to have their opinion heard in that environment. And those are often the opinions we need to hear because the rest of the group are all saying the same things. So by setting some time aside, usually the first kind of 20, 30 minutes of these sessions, and just making sure that everyone gets to go around the room. There's obviously usually lots of post-it notes involved because I like some tactile elements to my workshops. So everyone can present their 3 or 4 points, put the post-it notes up on the board, and make sure they have their say before we go into discussion. And then when we are actually in that discussion, it's really important if you're chairing it, but I think anyone in the meeting can do this, to make sure that everyone's opinions are being heard. And that might just be, you see someone at the back who's had their hand up for a long time, make sure that they get their say. And if you see someone else being interrupted in the meeting, I mean, anyone in that meeting can say, hey, look, no. Sam had a really interesting thread there and they didn't get a chance to finish. Let's give them the opportunity to finish because I want to hear that opinion. So I think anyone can do it. It's easier if you're the chair, of course. But yeah, I think those are the environments that I try to make as safe and welcoming as possible. So
I myself, I've experienced on a few Zoom calls this issue, I guess. So having an opinion and going to say something and then 10 other voices come over you on the Zoom call, and it almost makes you think, oh, I'm not going to say anything now. You know, I haven't been heard or I've been spoken over. So I think your approach is really great to see. And with that in mind, how do you ensure that employees can voice contrasting opinions without fear of negative consequences in your teams?
that's a really interesting question and another tough one to solve, of course, because as with most of these topics, I mean, nearly every topic in business ends up being a people problem, right? but I think really you need to make the change in your leadership level if this is going to change within your organization. And if you have more senior leaders, I hope this is something which is already part of their mindset, to make sure that they run these meetings, make sure that they gather the opinions of the whole team before making decisions or moving the conversation on. If you have inexperienced leaders and managers, which obviously every organization will and should have, then obviously you first need to make sure their opinion is heard, lead by example, but also offer them training if you think it's going to help, have workshops around how you can ensure there's more different voices heard in meetings. And I think when I've really fortunate to have managed to go through various levels at the same company, because you get to first be a programmer, then manage a team of programmers, and then manage a team of managers. And each one of those comes with its own challenges and learnings. But when building a team of managers, I put a really big focus on making sure that I brought people into the team who would help to build an inclusive workspace, so that creativity can thrive and so that everyone's opinions can be heard.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And something that I'm really excited to talk to you as well about, John. I had a really great Q&A with Mina, your CTO, a few months ago. And you are the initiator of the Games Matter initiative at Paradox. And I just think that's fantastic. Please, can you tell us a little bit more about this? What was the inspiration for setting this up, the purpose, the mission?
Games by Her was a 12-week evening course that we ran for women and non-binary people interested in learning more about game development. Now, we actually aimed this course at existing developers, so people who, they didn't have to be experts, but they should have some experience in JavaScript or C# or another programming language. The first half of the course, we focused very much on the language of C++. We built 3 small game projects throughout the 12-week period. So we did still build games in the first half, but we focused on the language. And in the second half, we spent the last 6 weeks building a 2D racing game. So like a top-down 2D racing game, entirely in C++ with no kind of, we used lots of libraries and frameworks, but no pre-built engine. So we actually had to get our hands dirty and build it from scratch. And the inspiration really came from these courses that I was involved with Tjejer Kodar, where, so we ran a couple of these courses of teaching game development as a way of learning JavaScript primarily, but with kind of a fun twist. It's like, you're learning JavaScript, but we're going to build a game. What a great way to do it, instead of, more website courses, which there are a lot of nowadays. So we ran a couple of those courses. And then we also ran, in the Paradox office, we had a one-day introduction to game development with JavaScript. And we had, I think it was about 300 plus applicants for that day. And it's like, hang on, there's a lot of people who want to do this. So, I mean, we specifically just targeted women for that course because it was kind of, that was where our mindset was at the time, I guess. But with 300 plus applicants, we're like, hang on, there's a lot of people who probably want to work for us. And throughout that course, several of them kind of questioned, like, hey, so I know this is just a day-long thing, but how would you see the path if we wanted to work for you? And unfortunately, at that time, I couldn't really give an answer.
Yeah.
The answer was just, unfortunately, we're teaching you JavaScript, which is going to be great if you want to build websites, but we make our games in C++. And you're just going to have to go away and learn it and come back in a year or two, have fun, which to me wasn't really a satisfactory answer. I mean, so I sort of thought about it for a while and talked to some people at Paradox and felt like I want to run a course to complete the loop. So someone could come along to the one-day taster and get a taster for this and go, actually, this is cool. Both coding and games is cool. And then they might go off and do a longer course, learn some JavaScript, spend a little bit of time maybe working on personal projects or in industry. And then this course was meant to kind of complete that journey. So it gives people who have maybe been through that first part of the journey a way to test out C++ and less web focused and more desktop or console focused game development. So they get a chance to spend 12 weeks building games in C++ and seeing if that's a career choice that they might consider in the future. So I hope that we see some of the participants of the course coming back and working for us in the future, because that would be super cool. Yeah. But really, we were anywhere in the gaming industry was is a win.
Fantastic initiative. That's so great that you're allowing people that taster into the world of gaming. How did the process look from, I guess, starting an initiative like this from conception to launch?
I'm in a fortunate position again, where Paradox allows people who have ideas to run quite far with them on their own, without too many kind of controls and measures. So from my perspective, I put together a couple of page proposal. I put together some, I think they were just slides in Google Slides, right? Nothing, nothing super fancy or anything, but just a couple of slides in why I think we should focus on this, put some time aside to run this project and what I hope to see come out of the other ends. And obviously making some of the benefits clear. I mean, we talked about the benefits of diversity back earlier today, but specifically around this initiative, there were obvious benefits to me, not only for the long term that we can hopefully make the workplace more inclusive, but also we'll get some positive press. We might get some people who come out of this course and actually apply for jobs with us. So it's a part of the recruitment pipeline. So I tried to focus on the short-term wins as well, because obviously someone somewhere needs to decide that it's okay to spend money and time on this. And it's easier to get that backing if you can show some of the short-term goals of the project as well as the long-term. Yeah. So put together this proposal, showed it to some allies internally first and got them on side so that it wasn't just me banging the drum like a crazy person in the corner. And then approached the people who controlled the time. Like I say, Paradox is very free with if you've got a cool idea and you think you've got time to run it in your position, then go for it. This tends to be the approach. So it wasn't too hard to convince people I should spend time on this. And then we did the harder than expected work of planning and running the course.
Yeah, because we'll touch on that in a moment, but one thing I think is great, we mentioned about organizations saying that they're passionate about diversity and inclusion, and when it actually comes to being in the business, they're not doing anything. What a great example of an initiative that Paradox is driving to see that they truly do value this. So let's talk a little bit about some of the biggest challenges you had and your top lessons learned from this experience.
The biggest challenge was getting started, really. Like, it's a challenge which I see around several initiatives of this type, and it's trying to make it high enough priority that it actually gets done. The conversation that I've seen in so many companies is that you have a workshop or a conversation around what we should be focusing on. You have a 10-minute topic of diversity and inclusion, and everyone says, that's a wonderful idea, that's brilliant, that's great, we totally should do that. And then at the end of the session, when you come to your priority list, you put diversity up the top, and then everything else goes above it. because that generates revenue, and this is going to get us more fans, and this is going to make the next game really awesome. So then you just kind of sit there sad as you watch it going down the list. And I think that unfortunately meant it took longer than I'd hoped to get it off the ground. Like we planned it maybe even up to 18 months, 2 years before we ran the course, was when we started talking about it. We had no firm plans at that point, but we started talking about it. And I realized in order to get this off the ground, we need to have a slightly bigger core team. I need to make sure that there are, initially it was kind of me as a champion and several people saying that's a great idea, but they weren't necessarily in a position to put time aside for it. So we had to build a core team and say, okay, the four of us, we're going to commit to doing this together. And I worked with some great managers at Paradox to help this course come through. And by having a team, it meant that when someone got really busy, there was someone else to make sure that there was still someone pushing. Mm-hmm. So it was really hard to get this up the priority list, and it's all our own fault, if you know what I mean. It's just that when you see something burning over there, it's really hard to say, well, actually, it can burn for a day or two more. We just need to keep focusing on this. So.
Yeah, I understand, especially when you're almost doing this as a labor of love, in a sense, like this initiative as well. And you've got 101 different things that you need to think about and work on. But you got there, you've done it. What a great experience. What's been the most positive outcomes for you?
It was super cool to engage with the participants on the course. I think that's always why I love running these kind of courses and events, because I get so much energy from actually engaging with the participants, and you learn a lot along the way too. You learn actual coding stuff that maybe you haven't interacted with for 15 years, because it's the kind of the low level type things that you don't really work with every day, and you start to see the gaps in your knowledge that have grown over time because, oh, it's different now. That simple thing that I haven't done for 15 years, you're supposed to do it differently now. And then the participants will ask you interesting questions, which make you both think about core concepts that you thought you understood differently, but also just you have to explain things in different ways to different people. But then you also learn a lot about different people's perspectives and their backgrounds, which brought them to this place in their life. And I find that super interesting, because we had quite a few parents on the course, actually, which surprised me beforehand, because I kind of thought that, like, very, very new parents. So they had to mute their mic because the baby was crying in the back kind of parents. And but it's super interesting to see people taking these kind of interesting courses in C++, thinking about game development at that time in their life. And they tend to bring a very different perspective, because they have to make really good use of the time. You assume the people on the course are going to be maybe kind of fresh out of uni, spent a couple of years coding, they've got loads of time to make a game in their spare time. And then you have to kind of adapt your way of thinking to, hang on, this person literally has 2 hours a week to do this course. So we need to make sure they get value out of it as well. So yeah, it was really inspiring working with a group of people like that. So
I can imagine. And it's so nice to see the different levels of people, diversity also in age and backgrounds. I think that's great. You're bringing every different element together. For anyone who would like to set up an initiative similar, an ally, or anyone who wants to make a positive impact, what advice can you share here?
I think I covered a couple of these things before, but I'll reinforce them. I think finding other people in the organization who can support you as you run the initiative is really key, because it's really hard to run these things with too small a group. You can't run this on your own. You need to be a team to run something like this. And even though you might only need one or two people driving it, so I would say while we had a great group of managers, we also pulled in our marketing team to help us put together the website and build some of the sort of social media buzz, I guess, before we rolled out the applications. But the co-teacher, Sophie, on the course, she was fantastic. And being able to talk through the course material with her, work through those lessons with her, it was super inspirational, because you're not sort of the first 20% you can always find energy for, but the last 80%, you need to work with other people to make sure that you can keep focused, keep working through. Some of the lessons are going to be a bit rocky. You're going to think, this is not going to be a fun lesson. I don't think I have very good content today. But then when you work with other people, you can make it much better and be part of a team. And I think also, like I mentioned before, selling it is really important.
Yeah.
You need to have backing from someone in the organization, because it is going to consume a lot of your time. So when it comes to selling it, make sure that you pull at both the heart trust and the head trust. We had an internal training a year or two ago where we talked about head trust and heart trust. And I think you need to earn both. You need to sell the facts, but also make someone feel it in their heart as well, that this is a good idea.
I think so many people can learn from the experience you've had at Games by Her. And I was just wondering, so you have experience, of course, in teaching and doing classes. What advice can you share to people here who might want to get involved in doing teaching at these kind of things, in terms of preparation, best practices around teaching?
I can't follow my own advice, but I can definitely give it to others. Prepare more in advance. I think we wrote, I think just before the last lesson, I ran our website through a website word counter, and it was something like 75,000 words of content we'd written. Wow. For the course. And I'm not going to lie, I'm going to say that a large portion of that was written 2 days before each lecture. I mean, I went in with the best intentions. I'm gonna write this over summer so that by September, when we run the course, everything is just sitting there ready and waiting. And that lasted for maybe the first 4 or 5 lectures. But it's really hard to plan that far ahead, because you want to keep things agile. If this topic didn't land in lecture 3, then you need to make sure that you can cover it again in lesson 4, maybe a different way, and then you have to take something else out to make space for that. So you can definitely plan better than I did, but it is hard to actually plan too far ahead. But I think other than that, like I really like just being myself. Like I think I haven't done professional teaching in schools or anything, but when I started teaching these courses, you try to I need to be respected and make sure that people know that I know what I'm talking about. And I think people just trust you and respect you more if you're just honest and open. And if you don't know something, you don't know something. It doesn't matter.
So you weren't giving out any detentions, John, in your classes?
Well, I mean, I handed out some red slips now and then, but no.
Thank you for sharing some great advice as well in the teaching. And you mentioned about preparation. That's a big thing, I think, for anything. Public speaking, so many different things. Preparation's key. But time management, because work, home life, initiative, how did you manage that also?
I have no doubt that Paradox would have been more than happy for me to spend more of my work time working on this, but it did. I did spend quite a lot of my Sunday evenings. So we taught the lessons on Tuesday evenings. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't writing it the night before. So Sunday evening became the time that I finished up my content ready for Tuesday. And that obviously wasn't work time, which was my own fault and undertaking. But it wasn't a great example of time management. If an employee came to me and said they were doing that, I would tell them, no, you shouldn't be working at the weekend. You should only work 9 to 5:30. But then I go off and do this on my own. But I kind of got into a routine, I guess. And I always have some coding project or some random thing that I'm doing on the side. And you can only really have at most 2 of those going at once. And this became one of them. And I enjoy writing the materials. I know we wrote 75,000 words. It didn't need to be 75,000. It could easily have been 40,000. But when I start writing more examples, I'm like, well, I might as well just write 3 more examples and make sure that this is super clear, and maybe link to a project and find some other kind of website you can read if you're interested. So it was really just because I was passionate about making it the best it could be. But I think if you are better disciplined than I, you need to make sure that you agree with your manager that you can spend a certain amount of time on this, because it is going to consume more time than you think, and make sure that that time is you can be flexible with that time before the lessons, because you're going to end up last minute wanting to change some things a few hours before the lesson. You can't work because for 2 or 3 hours people are pinging you, asking you questions. I'm going to be late, is that okay? And the event management takes over, so you need to block that time out as well.
It takes commitment, perseverance, keep going at it, and I think as well remembering your why, your personal statement for the event, because I can imagine at times there must have been so much going on, and it's can be quite challenging, but remembering the reasons why you're doing it, that keeps you going. I know it does for me on many different things that I drive. That's something I believe.
Completely agree. Like
Simon Sinek stood out for me on that one. I read his book Start With Why, and that just really resonated with me, always remembering my why, my personal mission statement. Why am I doing this? Yes, it's taking hours and hours, but it's all for the good reasons. So it's a good tip, I would say, as well. Just remember your why.
I love that book, and he did a pair of them, right? Probably more, but there's the Start With Why, and then there's the book for finding your why. And I found both of those really inspirational. When I moved into my previous role as technical director, reading Finding Your Why was really good for me, because the role was less defined, I guess. The higher up you go, the more freedom you have over your time, and I needed to find my why at that point so that I could spend my time wisely. So yeah, great books.
It is indeed. And talking of personal development, I know you've been educating yourself within diversity and inclusion through, of course, just the teaching, through having conversations with your wife, but how else can other people educate themselves on this? So can you recommend any resources or communities that have really helped you?
I actually very rarely kind of hunt down specifically diversity and inclusion as topics to kind of read or listen to podcasts about, but I often end up going to leadership and management podcasts and then finding the diversity topics and pulling those out. So I unfortunately don't have like a big list of all the cool resources that I work from, but I do find that there is a podcast. I'm just trying to find out. There's a podcast called Diversity, where the S is a C, and it covers diversity in the finance industry. And obviously, sometimes that can be very different from the tech and video game industry, but it's still interesting to listen to episodes of that podcast, see similarities and differences between the industries and the topics they cover. Outside of that, not 100% focused on diversity, but I think a lot of her work is really, there's a lot of synergies and a lot of crossover. And a friend at work put me on to Brené Brown, and she has a book, Dare to Lead, which is where I started. She has the podcast series on Spotify, which I often dip into and listen to those. And I think this leading with courage topic opens up a work environment which is very similar to the one that you're trying to create when you increase diversity in your workplace. So I think if everyone can be open with their opinions and forthcoming with their kind of current emotions and feelings, then you make a more diverse and inclusive work environment. So I love her work. It's great.
Yeah, she's amazing. And this is so weird, John. And honestly, I'm not even just saying this. This morning on the way to work, I listened to a Brené Brown and Simon Sinek podcast, and it was talking about the infinite game. So yeah, check that one out if you haven't already as well.
I have not heard that one, but that's great.
Yeah, Brené Brown's amazing, and thank you for sharing. I haven't actually heard of Diversity, so I'm going to check that out myself. And I think there's just so many resources available, which is great. And we also obviously speak about having more allies on these topics, which is really important, because in turn that raises more awareness. So can you share some practical tips that allies can use to actively support more women, in the workplace or historically minoritized groups?
I'm going to focus on the meetings again, because I actually think that's a really important part of where you can actively, again, I like tangible solutions instead of kind of, I think it's great to discuss the higher level topics as well, but I like to offer tangible solutions when I can. And I think you don't need to be the leader of the meeting to help make the meeting spaces. It doesn't need to be a meeting, but discussion spaces within an organization more open and diverse. And I think it's easier once you've done it once, but it's not too hard to shut people down if they're being negative about other people's opinions. Like, I think, fortunately, I haven't seen this for a long time, but there are still a lot of environments where people, they will jump on someone's idea if it doesn't align with their own, both to kind of add weight to their own idea, but in doing so, they put someone else down, and they create a space where you can't be open with your thoughts and opinions, squashing the sort of diverse group of opinions that you have around the table. And I think it's really easy. If you're calling yourself an ally, I don't really like that phrase, so I I get why you use it, but I'm like, I always feel, again, it's about taking up space that I'm not sure is mine. But if I'm in a meeting and I see someone being very negative about someone else's idea, then now, and maybe it comes partly with the position that I get to hold in the company, but I can find myself very quickly just saying, hey, look, we all need to have different ideas around the table. Please don't be so rude to that person. Like, you're being rude, you're making them feel bad. Don't do that. And if you just call someone out on it directly across the meeting, I would say 9 times out of 10 it goes well. And the one time that out of 10 that it doesn't, they usually make themselves look bad anyway, because they kind of crawl back in themselves and try to kind of armor up and say lots of reasons why it was okay for them to be mean. And obviously I hope that doesn't happen. That's not the outcome that I want. But usually most people will just sort of say, you're right, I'm sorry, that was out of place. Let's carry on the discussion. So I think call people out. And if you're not confident enough to do that directly, especially if it's your manager or something, it can be very hard. I think just making sure that people who you can see have something they want to say get the chance to say that. Like, I've been in meetings where someone's been interrupted over and over, and I think you just need to say, hey, look, this person obviously has something they want to say. I want to hear it. You can give up your space in a meeting to other people, and that's a really valuable way, I think, and of showing that you're on their side. It's like, I want to hear this person's opinion because you've been cut off 3 times, and that's not cool.
Yeah, that's some great advice again, John. And also on the topic, I know you don't like the term allies. Let's say supportive networks, community type vibe.
I just don't like it when it's applied to me. I think I don't mind the term. I feel uncomfortable having the term applied to me, but I'm like, I'm weird.
Well, you're doing great. Whatever you want to say it is that you're doing, it's fantastic, John. It really is. But I guess individuals who want to become an ally and get involved in this space, maybe similar to you, are feeling a little bit as if they might be speaking out of turn, or feel a bit uncomfortable in approaching such a discussion. So what advice can you share for women on how to better engage and support male allies?
I'm going to play back on times when things have happened that have had a positive influence on me, because I think that's the kind of best way to answer that question. And I think, I know it sounds very needy, but when you've done something good, like when you've stood up and given space to someone in a meeting, and if you've received that kind of support from someone in a meeting or workshop, reach out to them afterwards and let them know that you appreciate it. Because I think I know it sounds so like needy, right? But when you receive positive reinforcement, it makes you feel like I did a good thing. Like, this person doesn't like it, but this person did, so it's fine. But if all you have at the end of the meeting is, oof, well, I annoyed that person, and I'm not really even sure if the person appreciated having that time to speak, then I think you're less likely to do it again in the future. Any other? I think it's good to, I think if you see someone who raises the topic quite a lot when there's the opportunity, like if there's someone in your workshop saying, hey, I think we should focus on diversity, just talk to them, reach out to them. And I really appreciate it when I do something wrong and someone just tells me. Like I only want to do these things to help, and obviously I'm going to sometimes slip up because I'm not in the right shoes to know the implications of everything I do. And I really appreciate it when someone just says, hey, John, I think it's great what you're trying to do, but actually that thing you said, I think it came across this way and it made me feel this way when you said it. Or if you phrased it like this, I think you would have actually encapsulated the problem better or reached out to people more heart to heart. So I really appreciate when people reach out to me, and it helps you just be seen as well. You realize that the things you're doing, people are noticing it. So
so communication, that's so important. Asking questions, being curious, listening, having an empathetic approach, I think, as well, when you're addressing these discussions. Great advice, John. It really has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today and hearing your story and the great things that you're doing. And like I say, I really can't thank you enough. To finish things off, what is the single greatest piece of advice that you can share when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
The number one thing for me is that you just need to listen when people tell you things. Like I think you need to listen, engage with, and learn from other people and their experiences, and change your worldview as you get that new data. Like it's so easy to just assume that other people think a certain way, and when they tell you that's not how they are thinking or acting, then you need to believe them and trust them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks ever so much for having me. It's been really nice.